Hey guys, I'm Charles Neal with a cold, but we'll get through it. We've got a new DVD coming out and it's on tips and tricks, and it's just all kind of different things we've done. But this is one that's in it and expanded a little more, but I've gotten a lot, for whatever reason, I've gotten a lot of emails lately about this topic. So I thought, well, you know, let's do a YouTube on it. So here we are. And I guess it's one of those things that sometimes for some of us, no matter how simplistic something seems, to others it's not. And the topic and the question is how to get nice, equal, rectangular, or whatever shape you want, how to get nice, clean drawer openings. You know, like in a table or something like that, where you've got an apron going across it and you want to cut out for the drawer. Now, we can take that a little further. We can also do it to where we can use the same piece of wood that come out to make the drawer front. That makes for really neat grain matching and makes for a really pretty look. Pretty simple to do, so let's see how we do it. The first thing you want to do is to make sure that the stock that you're going to be making the drawer front or the apron out of is longer than what you need, typically by an inch or so, and it's wider. Now this one's much wider than what we're going to be doing, because we're just going to do a little simple, I don't know, 3 3/4 inch drawer. Let's just use that as an example. And let's assume for a minute, like the blanket chest back here, that we want 2 drawers. So how can we get this really neat? What we do is we're going to start out and we're going to cut. The way we're going to do it, we're going to cut a strip off that's going to be our bottom. Then we're going to cut our drawer out, the width of what's going to be the drawer, and then we're going to cut another piece that's going to be our top. Now, in this case, and again, you can do it any way you want, but in this case, I'm simply going to cut a piece 1 inch wide. Now, I know that if I cut a piece 1 inch wide, I'm subject to this piece moving. Meaning that, you know, thin, narrow strips like to move. They can come out not straight. So what I'm going to do, to be safe, I'm going to cut this at 1 1/4. Just to make sure I've got enough material that if I need to come back and retrue that, I can. Again, the best advice I can ever give you on woodworking, particularly when you're cutting narrow pieces, is sneak up on it. Cut wide, trim back. I think Norm Abram coined the cliche, measure twice, cut once. I'm of the opinion, measure twice, cut it 2 or 3 times. To make sure, sneak up on it. Sneak up on that final dimension. So I'm going to cut this at 1 1/4. Should have had my narrow push stick, but we made it through. Okay, now I'm going to cut what's going to be my drawer opening. But before I get too far along, I want to put some marks. I want to make sure that I keep everything perfectly oriented. Now I'm going to use a magic marker on this so you can see. But I do not recommend, you know, a magic marker can dye. It's actually a dye in here, and it can stain your wood where you can't get it out. So I'm going to say this again. This is just so you can see it. Well, let's just assume for a moment, and we'll lay it out a little better. Let me measure this and get a center mark. All right, very quickly, this is 34, so that's a 17-inch center. Now I want the divider that's in the middle to be 2 inches. Now we're just picking numbers out of our head here just to, so then that's going to leave us 16 inches. So let's do a 14-inch drawer. All right, this is my bottom. This is going to be my top. So I want to make sure that I know that I'm oriented correctly. So after I do this, I can put it back together. And you're going to see we're going to be cutting this apart and gluing it back together. But the other thing that I want to do, where I've got to be very careful, is that I make sure that I go back together exactly as I came apart. So make sure you have some good indicator marks here that's going to allow you to do that. Ever how you want to mark it. Now I'm going to take what's going to be my drawer width out. In this case, 3 3/4. But again, it doesn't matter, whatever size you want to do. Now, I could very easily go ahead and trim my bottom or my top to whatever I want, to the width I want this. But I find that going ahead and leaving it heavy at this moment, meaning a little wider, then gluing everything together, then come back and trimming it back, makes for a little bit easier application. And the reason for that is that the wider these pieces are when I glue it together, once I've got it glued back in place, I'm not going to get any movement. Okay. The next thing we have to do is we have to do some cross cutting. So I'm going to get my miter gauge and we're going to cut some. Okay, making sure that your miter gauge is square, or you could use your chop saw or whatever. Let's cut the 2 inches out of the center. Now let's make sure we keep all of this nicely oriented. Okay, now to make sure both of my drawers are perfectly even, I'm going to measure it and set it at 14 inches. Okay, let's cut a drawer. Okay, now what we need to do, assuming for a moment that we want a flush mount drawer. That means that the drawer sits flat with the face of the apron or front or whatever you want to call it. What we want to do now is we want to orient everything right back together, just like we had it. Just like it came apart. Now, you have one of two options. You can either fit this back together perfectly tight and then trim your drawers again to make for your openings on the side. But a neat little trick is just to take something like a 16 gauge finishing nail, line your center up, and just using the finishing nail to set your gap. That's the spacer. And I'm dropping them here. So let's move on. A little quick 1/16 of an inch shim or whatever you want your gap to be works just fine. Then, again, put your ends back as exactly like it was. Now what you're going to be missing is the actual kerf. You understand what I hope you understand what I'm showing you. You're going to notice right here on the end when I bring it all together, I'm missing my kerf. That's the reason you want to make sure it's wider or longer. Then all we have to do is simply, don't drop it in the trash. All we have to do is simply glue it back together. Now, like I said, in this case, then you can take your finishing nail when you're gluing it, set it in place as a spacer just to make sure that your space, or again, just any kind of little shim that you want, whatever you want to use to define your space. Glue it up. Now when you do that, common sense says you don't glue your drawers back in. That didn't sound exactly right, did it? Well, don't glue what's going to be your drawer fronts back in. Pull everything tight, then take a mallet and tap these out, because if you get any glue squeeze out on a corner or something, it can actually glue them back in place, and that's not a good thing. When you're done, the only thing you have to do is trim your top and bottom to your final width. And what you're going to have when you're done is you're going to have your drawers to where the front of them, all the grains match perfectly. Now here's a tip. If you're using a figured wood or anything else, be very, very careful with it. Okay? And use, again, try to keep just the kerf, just one blade kerf. And make sure you line it back up exactly as it came apart. Go very easy with that. Got me? All right. Once it's clamped, it's a whole lot easier. And as you can see, when this is removed, and then our front is put back, ends put back, we have a nice straight drawer opening, and our drawer our drawer is going to fit perfectly in here. Now, there's one other way. Let's assume for a moment that you want what is called an overlay drawer. And that's where typically we will cut a rabbet around it so the drawer sits proud of the front and actually overlays the opening. Well, you can use the same technique. The only thing we have to do now is we have to reduce our blocks, our centers, by the amount we want it to overlay. Meaning, if we want this to overlay a quarter, that'd be a quarter on the top, quarter on the bottom, we need to remove 1/2 inch. And then what we need to do is we're going to have to slide. We're going to have to bring our drawer front in. If you're going to do an overlay, you might want to cut just a little bit longer than if you're doing a flush, because we got to have that slide room. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now I want to make sure I take it off the same place. So let me get it right. Now, in case you don't know this, I'm going to tell you. Never take something this narrow and try to put it between a saw blade and a fence. If you do, and you get the least little bit, you don't have enough bearing surface here. So if you wiggle this the least little bit, it's going to kick back on you. That's a very dangerous thing. Never do that. This is a perfect place for a miter slide. So let's use it. So I'm going to reduce this by 1/2 inch. Now, can you take it off of 1/4 off one side and 1/4 off the other? Yes. But you have to remember something. The more cuts we take out of this, the more we're disorienting our grain from matching. The best place to take it off is at the top. The reason for that is that if you have a table or anything, it creates a shadow. The shadow line is greater at the top than at the bottom. That shadow line, if there's any discrepancy in that grain, just like we were doing a regular glue, if there's any discrepancy in that grain, it's not going to be as visible if you remove it from the top as it would be if you removed it from the bottom. Okay. Now, if you're doing something like this where you're very short, the piece is, and you're working close, then too close for your own comfort, then simply use a clamp across it to secure the piece. But I'm okay here, so I'm just going to nip these off. Now you notice one other thing. My little blocks were coming back. With the blade I have, I know they're not going to throw back at me. But if you need to, you can put an auxiliary fence on your miter and have it extend out beyond. And when you make the cut, go all the way past the blade. That'll deposit any waste you have behind the blade. Okay, with that cut, all we have to do, again, is we put everything right back together like it came apart. Now, we have our overlay for our drawer, top and bottom. Again, shift in 1/4 inch. Set your end block up. See, you got to keep them marked good or you can mess up in a heartbeat. Set it in 1/4 inch to give your overlay. Mark and glue your pieces in. Keep the center dead center. Don't move it. and then just slide this in under, clamp everything up. And while I've got more overlay here than what I'm actually going to have, you get the premise of what's going to happen. And you're going to be, in this case, you're not only going to be losing that 1/2 inch of overlay, but you're also going to be losing the 2 saw curves. If you're using an 1/8 inch blade, you've got a 1/4 overlay here, 1/4 on this side, plus a 1/4 of an inch of saw curve, because we've got an 1/8 inch blade and we have 2 cuts. Understand? So to leave your piece of wood a couple inches longer, and then when it's all said and done, you're going to cut it off square, make your mortise and tenon joint, or whatever you're going to do. But then again, you come back, even though it's overlaid, what you're going to have is you're going to have a joint or a drawer opening and a drawer that came out of the exact same piece of wood and matches the grain flow. It's one of those things that really makes for a neat visual. See what I'm showing you? And your grains are going to still remain in alignment. Makes for a neat looking front. That's kind of the way you do it. And it saves you a lot of wood. I'm Charles Neal. I'll catch you later.